Hello and welcome to the OLM Dev Working Group meeting. Today is Thursday, June 16th. On the agenda for today, we have several items from Chris. Chris, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to remember, I don't have it in front of me. So the first one had to do with, so file-based catalogs, we had discovered that the catalogs don't run on power. And so I think there are a couple of actions, and I've been trying to, I was busy and so I couldn't dig up the links for those things. Yeah, so there's basically two actions. One, there's going to be a startup probe, right, to allow delaying or to detect the slow startup of the catalog on power systems. And then there was, and that's an OLM change, right? So OLM would actually have to change, which means all clusters where an OLM is installed would have to have that backported in order to be able to leverage that. Then there was also some work done to add some profiling to the OPM serve, so we could try to figure out why it's taking so darn long to start up that thing. There's some issues right there. Thank you. And that's kind of a diagnostic issue. So I'm wondering if anybody has actually recreated this other than us, and are there things that we need to do to try to figure out what the actual problem is, so we don't have to backport that patch to all the different versions of OLM. I don't have that skill personally. I don't know a lot of people in my group that would, so I don't know if we can actually directly help. And I was just wondering if you guys need access to machines, or have you been able to recreate it? Do you know? Does anybody know about that one?
Yeah, I can speak to that. This is Jordan. Hey, so basically, Chris, you got me in the crosshairs here for A and B, and Vu in the crosshairs for B on this one. So to give a little background for anybody on the call who might not be familiar with these issues, the original bug that John opened, the BZ, was based on trying to work on this specific alternate architecture and having difficulties getting the resulting FBC pod to come into service. And despite our best efforts, we were not able to replicate that issue. But yeah, I know Vu's not here. And then what happened is, as we investigated further with John, because we were having difficulty getting access to that specific architecture, we identified that it was the readiness and liveness probes that were failing. While I continued to run down possible access to the Little Endian PowerPC resources on our side, we were just continuing to iterate with John. And then we did actually determine, though, that even though I could not replicate it with John's catalog, when we flipped the switch to try to get the marketplace catalogs using the file-based catalogs, because it turned out that they were not using them. They were using the old SQLite. And so when we turned those on to use FBC, they all blew up in the same manner.
Sure. On other platforms, even.
On every architecture.
Yeah, okay, yep.
So suddenly it became a real easy resource to scavenge, right?
Yep.
And we nailed down, okay, well, it's basically because, whereas the old approach with the SQLite was that it just needed to access the file for the database and then it could immediately serve it. Then with FBC,
pre-indexed and ready to go, right? Very easy. Yeah.
Right. Current FBC requires a marshaling and validation phase that it wasn't present in the other. So
correct, yeah.
That was blowing our default readiness probe there. So Vu championed that and validated a startup probe approach that allows us for anything created of type image to give us some time to get ready. And I'm forgetting how that exactly works, but I believe that it's contingent on the gRPC server coming into service. But with those figures, we've been able to validate that it does solve that problem. Unfortunately, the reason that it hasn't been, that the PR hasn't completed is because of the fact that it coincided with the need to bump to support Kubernetes 1.24, which changed some authentication models for validate or tokens, and that broke some of our ETE. And so we're basically clearing the pipeline to get all of that through. So it's a long way around the mountain to say, I believe that we have a very, very good understanding of the root cause for this issue, and that we have adequate resources and have spent adequate amounts of time to feel comfortable with the fix that we're putting forward that's going to solve the problem. But we just need a little more time to get everything through the pipeline.
Right, so the key problem I have is that the fix has to be done in OLM. Right, so that means that the fix needs to be backported to all of the OpenShift versions that ship OLM that are going to be running file-based catalogs. Know what I mean?
So I know that Vu responded to your BZ on that subject.
Did he?
And
Gosh, I didn't see that. All right.
okay, and I know that the general policy is that we tend to support only a couple of versions back.
Yeah, fortunately, 4.6 is an EUS release for us.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
And we ship one catalog that runs on all versions, 4.6 through 4.10.
Hello. Can anyone hear me?
I can
Yes.
hear you.
All right. Vu is not here, but there are not a Vu that can answer that question. Let's see. So yeah, I did respond to you, Chris, on the BZ. So first of all, that fix is already merged on upstream, and it's still pending downstream, which is generally explaining what's happening there. So it's going to get a little bit of a delay there, but I expect to get merged next week. And I responded to your answer on the BZ, saying that we normally backporting fix to probably 2 previous version, but no more than that. And for record, the FPC support that we have is only beginning to have, I think, starting in 4.10, probably 4.9 actually, but not before that. So I would recommend you not using that before 4.9, to be completely honest with you. And for record, the startup probe, that the new feature that I'm using to fix the problem, I don't remember on the top of my head when that was introduced in Kubernetes, which version that is. So I need to figure it out, because if the previous version of, OCP is not in the Kubernetes version that's going to be using that feature, then I cannot backport that back either. So you need to figure out that part as well. Make sure.
All right, so basically what you're saying, right, so what you're saying is now we're going to have to fork all of our deliveries that run on multiple versions of OLM, that now we'll have to have separate catalogs. We'll have to continue to use the SQLite catalog for much longer than when we're expecting to. So I'm assuming that other clients such as Red Hat, right, who have ship catalogs, you're going to continue using SQLite catalogs on your older versions of OpenShift.
Correct. Because FPC is a new feature. It's not, some random bug fix, anything like that. So
No, I know.
whenever
I totally get it. I've been on FBC's bandwagon for about 6 months now. So I totally get it.
So correct, even from the upstream perspective, whenever the version, whatever the version OM actually begin to support FPC, that basically when you can begin to using FPC, not before. So.
All right. Well, that's disappointing. Okay.
So I'm not entirely sure of the particulars, but it feels like there might be an opportunity to generate your catalogs using the update, using the later version of the tool set, and then just use that in previous releases. Because once it's been generated, it doesn't care.
No, it does.
Joe's trying to talk in the chat, but he's not able to get his mic working. One of the things he's pointing out also, and he's throwing in a link for the PR, is to specifically try to lubricate this aspect of the transition. We are talking about trying to work in an FBC to SQLite conversion so that it's possible, so that we don't find ourselves in the position where customers have to release multiple, they have to fork their repositories, like you're saying.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, finally. Yeah. So thanks, Jordan. But yes, what Jordan said.
Okay, so basically you would have a tool that would convert an FBC catalog to a SQLite catalog.
Yeah, there's some back and forth about like, is that something we can support? Or like what portion of FBCs are actually even possible to convert back? If we do convert back, that has implications on expectations that clients will have on being able to later run the OPM imperative commands. So we're kind of just working through the process of, is this feasible, and like what would we need to do to convince ourselves that this is something we could support. So I think the point that I'm at least, is that it is possible. There are some things that the tool would have basically say like, sorry, you can't reverse migrate that thing. And the only other catch is basically that like once you convert something from FBC to SQLite, like it doesn't make sense to do OPM index add on that thing after the fact, right? So what we're talking about doing is basically calling this reverse migrate a new add mode, right? So OPM has like replaces Simver and Simver skip patch add modes. So what we would do is add a new add mode basically called reverse migrate, but it wouldn't be part of the add command. It would be something that we'd add to the database. And from then on, then we'd have OPM index add check that column probably in the package table. And if it says that the add mode was reverse migrate, then we'll just, if you try to use OPM index add, we'll fail and say like, sorry, like this is basically like a immutable package. Like you can remove it, but you can't change it anymore. The only way to change it is to reverse migrate again. So I think if we are able to convince ourselves that kind of all of those things are okay, then that's probably the approach that we'll take.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've been kind of betting on the fact that the gRPC API is really the standard on how clients would normally connect to it, and that's stable. And so we were kind of assuming that we would switch everything. So we're on a path of switching everything over to FBC for all of our versions, for all our entire catalog, for all versions of OLM, because of that stable nature of that. And so this would be a major trick for us, because we're also going to have other downstream processes that are going to be dependent on the FBCs being there.
Yeah, so the other way to do this, right, would be to say like, well, I will just control the registry pod that runs, and I'll just create a catalog source that points to that service or whatever, right? So you're not relying on OLM to create and manage that pod for you. You could create the pod with the startup probe yourself, and then hook it up with a catalog source that uses an address. Granted, I mean, that probably breaks other pieces of the workflow, but that is a workaround. And I should also note that, like, as far as Red Hat is concerned, this is a 4.9 plus feature, so you probably wouldn't get support prior.
Yeah, so I want to speak on that a little bit. I did mention on my response to you on the VC as well, Chris, that from a technical standpoint, you can allow FBC-based catalog to work with the previous version of OM by actually shipping that FBC with a new binary and packaging that in the catalog source image, and just provide that along with the catalog source when you create a catalog source on the cluster. That should work because you reported out that the gRPC standpoint, gRPC convention and API is still the same. It's not changing that much, so it should be working just fine from that perspective. But again, from the support statement standpoint, that we actually not supporting that. So if there's some problem with the gRPC to some extent, then you on your own with that. So that's the caveat there, basically.
Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with anything other than an image source for the catalog source. I guess I've never seen that. I've seen Is that in the doc?
There's no doubt for it. I mean, when you build a catalog sort image, you build that with the binary, the OPM binary that you have along with
Oh, no.
FPC. You see
Yeah,
what I'm
sorry,
saying?
you know, I'm back to what Joe was bringing up. He was talking about.
Oh, that's a different type of catalog sort. Remember, in the catalog sort spec, they have the field name type, basically, and there's an image type, the gRPC type, and there's another type that we're using. I'm pretty sure that's internal and there's something like that along those lines, where you can basically spin up a part on your own, and you just connect that part to the catalog source directly, and then that how the catalog source been created, and it can begin to serving the content on the cluster without relying on OM to actually create a registry part for you by itself. You're the one creating it.
Unfortunately, that's not going to work for us because you've got customers who are, so we've got customers already today, right? And they're already installed our catalog, you know, thousands of them, and they'll upgrade. Eventually, we'll just switch our latest tag, right, to point to an image that's FBC. And as soon as they do that, it's going to blow up. And so clearly we can't do that now. We'll have to make sure it stays SQLite for a long period of time. And we might actually have to have two separate tags to have a SQLite database and a FBC database simultaneously, at least for certain versions of OpenShift.
Yeah, that's what Red Hat's going to do. There's other options though. If you really need to have FBC everywhere, like you could have a mutating webhook on pods that looks for registry pods and sets the startup probe. You could have your own controller that basically repeats what the catalog source controller does, except manages separate and puts down the registry pod for you. So yeah, there's nothing that's going to be built into OLM that solves the problem prior to 4.9, but if you absolutely have to, I think there's some other ways to do it.
Yeah, so I think what you're suggesting is we'd embed some logic inside our own catalog source, right? Instead of just OPM serve, we'd do something else, and that would do some other magic that would potentially patch it, because we can't like have customers run other stuff ahead of time to patch things before they run. I mean, I guess we could, but it's really intrusive. It'd be nice to have it automatic. That's
Yeah,
what
I was saying, as part of actually running that registry pod, you would, the fix is there needs to be a startup probe. And if the OLM catalog is involved in creating that pod, which it is with the image type, then you're at the mercy of OLM doing that for you. And so my only point is, if you can work around OLM managing that pod for you, potentially, depending on how the system is set up, by managing that pod yourself in various ways. And one of the ways, like I said, is like, well, you'd actually still have OLM manage that pod for you, except put a mutating webhook in line with the API request that sees it and says, no, put the startup probe in here for me.
Yeah, I thought of that too. That sounds dicey to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an implementation detail, it's not part of the, this pod spec is owned by you and not really, part of a spec, right? So it's not external.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I guess have you thought about, is there a way that the data that is being read from OPM serve could be pre-digested somehow, like pre-cached or pre-parsed into some kind of blob that could be quickly, like basically pre-parse it into a bunch of protobufs, right? And just load it into structures in memory. Would that be faster?
Yeah, so that's almost what happens today. Today, it so it loads the FBC, validates it, and then does list bundles itself, and then writes all of the bundles out. And right now, it just remarshals them as JSON, such that by the time the gRPC server is serving stuff, it just like loads stuff from the serialized JSON list bundles effectively. So that's another thing you could do. The problem again, though, is that OPM serve doesn't know about anything that you might pre-compute. So we'd also have to backport that. Now, I guess that might solve your problem because you could say, well, I don't care about using a newer version of OPM on my older versions of OpenShift, in which case, sure, like maybe that's something we would put in, you know, a 4.11 or 4.12 version of OPM, and then you could use it.
Exactly, that's what I'm after. So yeah, so somehow if that data that you're digesting, if it's actually written out to a file somewhere, and we could tell OPM, hey, this is a well-known file directory, go ahead and use that as your cache, right? Instead, and we could kind of pre-do that work, and that wouldn't affect our customers quite so bad.
Yeah, we'd have to think about that. It almost kind of starts to look again like SQLite, because now the source of truth is a little bit different. Whereas like with FBC, you can literally put it in the image, and like what someone wrote is now the thing that we're serving. Whereas what you probably do is you have a Docker file with a multi-stage build that calls the, you know, convert this to the serialized thing that I'm going to serve, and then copy that thing into the image.
No, I get
So-
that. It's a trick that all sorts of containers are using now. Even Java has, they're basically pre-running all the data or all their processes, loading it in the memory, and they're just storing it as a binary file. So when they start up the image, they just dump the whole state in memory rather than having to read all these class files and class loaders and all that kind of stuff. So it's the same similar kind of concept, but much simpler.
Yeah,
I just call
something
it
to
a
think
caching
about.
optimization.
Yeah, it's the trade-off between like basically what's the source of truth, and is the source of truth the thing that we're actually serving, or is there something else that we're building as something to cache? And yeah, that's just something we'll have to probably think about more. Obviously, like we don't love the fact that it takes it's basically a linear load time now, right? In the past, it was constant time because the database is just sitting there. Now it's the bigger the FBC, the longer it takes to load. So there's clearly some optimization we need to think about doing, but we just haven't gotten to the point of figuring out exactly what that should be.
I just want to say something real quick. This has just come on top of my head when we were talking about this. But from the technical standpoint, when you do the OPM serve, you basically just serve the gRPC server pretty much, you know, make the connection to it and then start with the communication channel. You don't really need the content file just yet until you actually query a specific gRPC endpoint to get what you want, meaning like query the list bundle to get information. So I'm wondering if at that, when the startup of the pod, we don't actually need to pausing anything until we actually need to serve the content in the actual query itself. So that may be an operation that we can do, maybe a thought, just a thought. I'm not really sure how that's going to work, but is that even feasible from the, you know?
Yeah, so parse on
binary
first touch.
standpoint?
Yeah, so you load it on first touch rather than at startup.
Or at least go ahead and start the server and do the loading in the background.
Exactly. So you don't really need to pausing the file yet. You basically just starting it up, and then when the query, that's when you actually begin parsing the file text that we have.
Well,
So
I don't think you'd want to wait for query necessarily, right? Because like we said, it's linear with how big it is. So what I would probably say as a first pass is we can go ahead and start the server immediately, but if you try to make a gRPC request right after you start the server, the gRPC server is going to say, sorry, not ready yet, try again later. And then while, you know, we basically start the server, and then immediately after that, we start doing this processing where we can convert and validate everything. And after, you know, 20, 30 seconds or whatever it is, then all of a sudden now the gRPC responses will start coming back with data. That seems like it could work.
All right, let's do that. Can someone at least capture that and maybe put it either in the Bugzilla or the I think we have both a Bugzilla and we've got the upstream ticket, you know, probably makes more sense for this call. If someone could maybe put that in there, that'd be good to investigate as an option, because I think that would really save us a person year's worth of work to have to go down this other path.
We'll make sure that that happens.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. All right, so I think we have one more topic from Chris, assuming that we're moving on from OPM Serve. Chris, do you want to speak to this the second topic you have?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So, we're trying to, understand, where you guys are going, with the new APIs, right? And so we had the straw man, which is fairly old now. It's almost a couple of years old. Where it talked about, DEPI, which is Depster at the time, RuckPack, Maestro, and kind of how they would work together. I think Nick Hale even put together this is what it could look like from a user perspective. And I know things have changed a bit, right? So, as you guys have worked on RuckPack, things have evolved a bit. And I'm having a problem still trying to put the dots together on how we're gonna eventually migrate from what we're doing now to how we're going to get to where we're going. I'm getting a huge amount of pushback from customers and from our own workloads on this whole idea of cluster scoped or de-scoped operators. People are flipping out because people don't understand the difference between extending control planes and application tenancy. And so they're I guess what I'm looking for is kind of an updated straw man on what you guys are thinking this is going to look like and how we educate our workloads, basically our product teams and our customers on how this is good, right? So they read the de-scoping plan, they read the straw man, and they still don't get it, right? And they just understand, okay, if we're going to do all this OLM stuff, how's this gonna work in the new world? Is there some kind of presentation you guys have or some roadmap that kind of describes that a little bit more concrete examples on how this would work? I know, Tim, you kind of came back and said you've got some internal stuff, but it's really not ready today. Maybe we have to table it and maybe you guys can spend a little more time putting something together. So I'm sure you guys have had this conversation internally.
We've had it a little bit. Basically, the TLDR is that we think there needs to be some sort of mechanism for RBAC templating such that a cluster admin can scope an operator in the same way that an own namespace or single namespace operator scoped from an RBAC standpoint. So in that world, the operator could deliver a template that says one way or another, like the service account for this operator needs these permissions, and then it's up to the cluster admin to say, okay, I'll give you these permissions in these different scopes. And they would do that by using a different API that we're working on, or that we're at least thinking about. So I think that's like kind of the approach that we're going to take. I don't know if there's any other piece of the question in terms of specifically the de-scoping aspect that you want to know about, but basically our answer to that is RBAC templating.
No, I get that. And I looked at the Maestro stuff and basically the feature API, and it kind of makes sense to me on how that would work. And we've built our own kind of version of that using what we call the namespace scope operator, which is kind of like a subset of the operator group to some degree. So do you guys, so we've also been talking about DEPI, right? So I know you guys are starting to think about DEPI. I think Dan talked about it a little bit, maybe a couple of weeks ago, but it was out of context for me. So I really didn't understand what you were talking about. And so how does DEPI, what do you guys were going to work on next for DEPI in the scope of RuckPack? Because there was some confusion, I think, on how they could be tied together or how they shouldn't be tied together. So I'm a little confused on that.
Yeah, I think we're still iterating on the design of DEPI. We're sort of in the prototyping stages. I think in the context of the integration between DEPI and RUCPAC, I think our current thinking is that DEPI would output this sort of resolve set bundle, which is essentially a wrapper bundle that contains like some bundle instances that RUCPAC can then unpack and create. So there's sort of a handoff between the two components, but in terms of the actual API surface of DEPI, it's still very much work in progress. Whereas more on the RUCPAC side, I think we've achieved some of the early goals we had in mind for those APIs.
Yeah, and I'll chime in and just say something a little bit different, and this will kind of highlight that like we haven't really thought about this a whole lot. Well, we're starting to think about this and we're trying to weigh pros and cons, but another avenue that we're going to investigate is like, should we totally decouple DEPI and RUCPAC and have some higher level component basically use DEPI as like just a SAT solver effectively, and that's all its scope is. It doesn't know anything about anything else, and you just ask it, resolve this stuff for me. And then the higher level thing says, okay, thanks for the resolution. Now I'm going to go and talk to RUCPAC to do what I need to do based on what you told me. So there's another iteration version of this that there's another controller that kind of integrates the two things together.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately probably gonna need pictures to be able to get all that, but okay.
Yeah, we're literally, we've got some pictures that we're working on now. I don't know if they're shareable, but it's all upstream stuff. So if you're interested, I'm sure we can share those things.
Yeah,
they're pretty rough though, so.
Yeah, so the way I usually work is I usually come up with customer use cases, and then you come up with what the end user is going to be, and then you do, the end experience is going to be, and then you decompose it in all the components and operators and those APIs that would build that. And from my seat, it seems like you guys are doing the opposite. You're developing all of the atomic things first, and then you're using that to develop other use cases that are much higher. But it's not clear to me. It's clear to you guys in your heads, but it's not clear to me at all on how they actually all wire together.
Yeah, I think part of that is also that we're trying to be cognizant that because these are APIs that are going to be exposed in a Kubernetes cluster, that we want each of them to basically be functional and usable on their own. So what we don't want to do is build a high level API that has like a very specific way of using the lower level APIs such that no one else can use the lower level APIs with any sort of sanity. So I think part of what you're seeing is that we want to make sure that the low level stuff is perfectly functional on its own. And yeah, like so that's kind of the approach that we're taking. I think the other aspect is that there's some downstream stuff that we're using as kind of the first guinea pig for, okay, how could we tie all these things together? So we're kind of taking our cues from this downstream thing called platform operators, which we can talk about separately if you'd like to. So yeah, there's kind of like a single lane and a minimum viable product kind of thing going on that'll have a tech preview API that will exercise all of these things together.
Okay.
So I think, Chris, to your ask, we have some document. So we have some internal, I guess, documentation, which I think you've seen most of it already in form PackMDs in terms of like clear architecture diagrams that describe all of these components. We do have something like that, but as Joe was saying, it's still sort of in the WIP phase. So I think your ask though is reasonable for like higher level architecture diagram on how these components would interface. And since we're still kind of ironing out the APIs and the separation between them, it's not, you wouldn't want to make a diagram and then immediately say, oh, it's outdated. But I think we should think about that and think about where we can put such a diagram in these projects to make it accessible publicly, right? Like if you want to document something like that upstream, where would you put it? So it's something good to think about.
I'm not too sure if this got covered, Dan, but it might just be worth, or one artifact here might be worth updating the intent straw man, given there's already a change log in place, and I think we forked it from Evan already.
Yeah, I think
Not
that's
sure if that's a
good
short
after.
term. Yeah, that might be a decent short term band-aid.
Yeah, just it's pretty old. It's 0.062 or whatever. I don't think it's been updated for a really long time. But yeah, I think there's probably some things in there that are probably not going to get done, or there's things that have changed, and it'd be kind of good to just get it refreshed as a starter.
Yeah. Okay. I guess if we want to update the documentation, that sounds reasonable. Okay. Is there any other topics that anyone want to discuss? No, I did not nominate myself to do that.
Yeah,
All
hey,
right.
this is a quick question. Maybe you guys, I joined a little bit late, but I'm trying to understand, like with FPCs and the OPM serve, is there a way to do this without baking the the FPC JSON into an image? Is there like a mode to use an external PV or something like that, where you don't have to build an image to serve up the JSON from it?
Yeah, like could you mount a config map or a sharded config map under the file system or something? Have you tried that?
Something like that.
So that's totally possible, but again, like that means you're using your own registry pod, right? So you could create a deployment that mounts a PV and calls OPM serve, and as long as that PV has a valid FBC where you mounted it, then that'll work. But there's nothing in the catalog source API that exposes the ability to set a persistent volume mount or anything like that.
Okay. I mean, do you view it as, an I mean, if we were to think about creating our own deployment to do that, and we're using, the OPM serve binary, is that should we think hard about trying that, or it's a non-starter, I guess? What do you think?
So one thing that we're probably going to do for our own catalogs is that when we build it, we're going to run. So you've got like the from line that says the OPM image that has the OPM binary in it, and then you copy the way that the generate Docker file works is you copy the FBCs in, and then you set the command to run OPM serve. What we're probably going to do is have a step in that Docker file that calls OPM validate, which as part of the Docker file. So we're going to run the OPM binary that's in the base image to validate it. So I think the only catch that you'd run into is that if you mount the FBC into a separate image, you don't have any guarantee at runtime that that FBC is valid according to what that OPM binary thinks is valid. Whereas if you build it in, you have the ability to run that validation as part of the build. If you've got some other process that somehow guarantees that it's valid, then I don't think there's any other gotchas there.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, cool. So I think with that, we went through all the items on the agenda. I think for next working group, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about FBC. So that should be great. It should be interesting. Some of the work on the new veneers.
Can you clarify? So I think every other week we have this architecture dev call, and then every other week in between there we talk about bugs, right? And we were just talking about OLM bugs, and we've shipped to RuckPack bugs. Is that on purpose? Is that what happened, or?
Yes. Yeah.
So is there any triage that happens on OLM stuff anymore? Are you guys doing that independently, or does nothing get fixed? I guess I'm just wondering what's going on with all the issues and stuff and operator, lifecycle manager, and registry.
Yeah, so I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago or maybe a month ago.
Yeah, I think I missed it.
Yeah, if there's a specific issue that you want to talk about, then that's the place to do it. So if there's a registry or OLM issue that you want us to talk about as a group, then put it on the agenda and we'll talk about it. But I think the decision was by default, like most of our effort now is geared towards the new stuff. So we're gonna also switch over the triage to also focus on the new stuff. But all that triage is still going on in the background. And if you're interested in something there, then just let us know.
But if we create issues in either of those two registries, does anybody look at them anymore? I mean, is there a process to scrub those at all, or is that a mistake now to even have issues?
That's a good question. I don't know if anyone else can answer that. I know that we're still looking at Bugzilla downstream. I can't speak myself to the upstream GitHub.
Yeah, I think it's just best effort upstream with regards to specific issues. And as Joe mentioned, if you have a specific issue that you'd like to bring up in the triage call, then we'd be happy to discuss it.
All right, so if I should tell my workloads if they need something done upstream, open an issue, but then we should also talk it probably on OLM dev and then put it on the agenda for the triage meeting.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okie doke.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for participating. We got through a lot today, and I'll see everyone at the triage or the next working group call. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.